Some things are supposed to stay buried forever, Commander Ryan Walker would later say. But at that moment he had no idea that a quiet Saturday morning would force the past back into the light. The annual Navy SEAL Memorial Gathering had drawn hundreds of people to the waterfront training facility. Families of veterans, active service members, retirees, and local supporters filled rows of folding chairs beneath a bright blue sky. American flags moved gently in the coastal breeze while a military band played softly in the distance. It was a day meant for remembrance, respect, and reflection. For Ryan Walker, it was supposed to be routine. After more than 20 years in uniform and countless ceremonies, he had learned how to keep his emotions under control. He greeted guests, shook hands, and exchanged stories with former teammates. Everything felt normal until he noticed a woman standing alone near the back of the crowd. She did not seem interested in drawing attention to herself. She wore simple clothes, carried no camera, and spoke to no one. If Ryan had not glanced in her direction at exactly the right moment, he might never have noticed her at all. The woman appeared to be in her early 30s. Her blonde hair moved lightly in the wind as she listened to the ceremony. She looked like any other visitor who had come to pay respects. Then she lifted a paper cup of coffee, and the sleeve of her jacket slid back just enough to reveal a tattoo on the inside of her wrist. Ryan froze. The sounds around him seemed to disappear. The conversations, the music, even the waves beyond the harbor faded into the background. His eyes locked onto the symbol. It was small, simple, easy to miss. Yet Ryan felt a chill run through him despite the warm weather. He knew that symbol. Every line, every angle, every detail. The problem was that he should not have known it, and she should not have had it. For several seconds he simply stared. One of the retired chiefs standing beside him noticed the sudden change in his expression. "Ryan, you all right?" the man asked. Ryan barely heard him. His attention remained fixed on the woman. She looked completely unaware that anyone was watching. Slowly she turned her head toward the stage as another speaker began honoring fallen service members. The tattoo disappeared beneath her sleeve again. Ryan felt his heartbeat quicken. That symbol belonged to a chapter of his life he had spent years trying to leave behind. According to every official record he had ever seen, almost nobody outside a specific team should even know it existed. Yet there it was, on the wrist of a stranger who looked as though she had simply come to watch. Ryan excused himself and stepped away from the crowd. He needed a better look. As he moved through the rows of chairs, memories he had not revisited in decades began pushing their way back into his mind. Questions multiplied with every step. Who was she? How did she know that symbol? And why did seeing it make him feel as though a ghost had just walked into the ceremony? When he finally reached a position where he could see her clearly again, the woman turned slightly, and for the first time Ryan saw her face. Then he whispered a single word under his breath. "Impossible." Ryan Walker remained where he stood long after the woman disappeared behind a cluster of guests moving toward the refreshment tables. He told himself there had to be a simple explanation. Symbols could be copied. Tattoos could be recreated. People could stumble across old designs online. Yet none of those explanations felt convincing. The image he had seen was not a common military emblem. It was not something sold on shirts or displayed in museums. It belonged to a mission so obscure that even many members of the special operations community had never heard its name. As the ceremony continued, Ryan forced himself to return to his duties, but his focus was gone. He shook hands automatically and answered questions without hearing half of what people were saying. Every few minutes his eyes drifted back toward the crowd, searching for the woman. Eventually, he spotted her standing near a memorial wall covered with engraved names. She was reading each one carefully. There was something sincere about the way she moved from name to name. She was not taking photographs. She was not looking for attention. She seemed genuinely interested in the stories behind the names. That detail bothered Ryan even more. Nothing about her behavior suggested she was pretending. Across the harbor, a bell rang to mark the next portion of the remembrance program. The crowd slowly gathered again. Ryan noticed the woman take a seat in the last row. She listened quietly while veterans shared memories of teammates who had inspired them. At one point, several people around her became emotional. The woman lowered her eyes and appeared affected as well, as though the stories carried personal meaning. Ryan felt a growing sense of unease. The symbol on her wrist had already raised questions. Now he was beginning to wonder if there was a connection deeper than coincidence. During a short intermission, he stepped away from the stage area and approached an older retired operator named Mike Dawson. Mike had served with Ryan many years earlier and possessed an excellent memory. Ryan trusted him. "Mike, do you remember the old insignia from that classified operation?" Ryan asked quietly. Mike studied him. "That is a strange question after all these years." Ryan nodded. "Just answer it." The older man frowned. "Of course I remember it. You do not forget something like that." "What?" Ryan hesitated. Even saying the operation's nickname out loud felt wrong. "I think I just saw it." Mike laughed softly. "That is impossible." Ryan had expected that response. "That is exactly what I thought." The smile disappeared from Mike's face. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Mike said, "Where?" Ryan pointed discreetly toward the seating area. Mike followed his gaze. The woman was still sitting alone. "Her?" Mike asked. Ryan nodded. Mike looked back at Ryan, confusion written across his face. "She cannot be more than 30 or 31 years old." "I know." "Then she has no connection to that operation." "That is what I am trying to figure out." Mike studied the woman again before shaking his head. Maybe it only looks similar. Ryan wished he could believe that. Unfortunately, he had already memorized every detail of the design years ago. There was no mistake. Before either man could continue the conversation, the master of ceremonies announced the next segment of the event. Guests returned to their seats. Ryan remained standing for a moment. The woman suddenly glanced in his direction. Their eyes met for the first time. She offered a polite smile, the kind strangers exchange every day. Then she turned her attention back to the stage. Ryan felt another chill. If she recognized him, she gave no sign of it. If she knew why he was staring, she hid it perfectly. Yet one thought now refused to leave his mind. According to official records, the symbol should have vanished decades ago. So why had it just reappeared on the wrist of a woman who seemed completely unaware of the questions she had brought with her? The ceremony ended shortly before noon. Families began gathering their belongings while veterans lingered in small groups, exchanging stories and promises to stay in touch. Ryan Walker remained near the memorial wall, watching the crowd thin out. The woman was still there. She had not rushed away like many of the visitors. Instead, she moved slowly through the display area, stopping to read photographs and service histories mounted beside the engraved names. Ryan decided he could not leave without speaking to her. Too many questions had already taken root in his mind. He waited until she stepped away from the wall and began walking toward the waterfront path. Then he approached. "Excuse me," he said. The woman turned and offered the same polite smile she had given him earlier. Up close, Ryan could see that she seemed calm and completely at ease. There was no sign that she expected anything unusual from the conversation. "I am Ryan Walker," he said. "I noticed you were taking a lot of time to look through the memorial exhibits." Her eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Commander Walker? I heard your name during the ceremony." "That is right." She extended her hand. "Emily Carter." Ryan shook it. The moment lasted only a second, but he could not help glancing toward the wrist where he had seen the tattoo earlier. Emily noticed the movement. "Something wrong?" she asked. Ryan quickly looked back up. "No. I was just wondering if you have family who served." Emily nodded. "My father did." Ryan felt his attention sharpen instantly. "Military?" "Yes." "Which branch?" Emily hesitated. "Honestly, I am not completely sure about all the details. He passed away when I was young." That answer surprised Ryan. Most children of career service members knew at least basic information about their parents' military background. Emily seemed almost embarrassed by how little she knew. "I come to events like this when I can," she continued. "It helps me feel connected to him somehow." Ryan studied her expression. She appeared sincere. There was no sign of deception. "What was your father's name?" he asked. Emily smiled apologetically. "You are probably going to think this sounds strange, but I never learned much about his service. My mother rarely talked about it. She said some things were difficult for him and that he preferred privacy." Ryan nodded slowly. That explanation felt believable, yet it did nothing to explain the symbol. "Can I ask you something a little unusual?" he said. Emily laughed softly. "Sure." Ryan gestured toward her wrist. "The tattoo. Does it have a special meaning?" Emily looked down before pulling back her sleeve. The symbol was fully visible now. Ryan felt the same shock he had experienced when he first saw it. Every detail matched his memory perfectly. Emily, however, seemed completely unaware of its significance. "This?" she asked. "I got it a few years ago." Ryan struggled to hide his reaction. "Why this design?" "Because it was on something my father left behind." Ryan stared at her. "Something he left behind?" Emily nodded. "An old metal tag. It was in a small box with a few personal items. I always liked the symbol, so eventually I had it tattooed." Ryan felt his pulse quicken. Did he ever explain what it meant? Emily shook her head. "No, that is the strange part. Nobody ever explained it. I asked my mother once, and she became uncomfortable. After that, I stopped bringing it up." Ryan looked back at the symbol. The mystery had only deepened. If Emily were part of some elaborate story, she was remarkably convincing. Yet everything about her suggested she was telling the truth. She genuinely did not know what she carried on her wrist. She had unknowingly displayed a mark connected to one of the most closely guarded chapters of Ryan's life. Emily lowered her sleeve again. "You are not the first person to ask about it," she said. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Someone else recognized it?" "Not exactly. People just seem curious whenever they see it." Ryan forced a small smile, but his thoughts were racing. For years he had believed the symbol belonged entirely to the past. Now he was standing beside a woman who carried it every day without understanding why. And for the first time, Ryan began to suspect that the answers he was looking for might not be hidden in military records at all. They might be hidden in the story of Emily Carter's father. Ryan barely remembered the drive home. Long after the memorial gathering ended, his thoughts remained fixed on Emily Carter and the symbol she carried on her wrist. By the time evening settled over the coast, he was sitting alone in his study with a locked storage case open on his desk. Inside were old notebooks, mission logs, photographs, and personal notes he had collected throughout his career. Most of them had not been touched in years. He stared at the contents for several moments before finally pulling out a worn folder. The label had faded with time, but he still recognized it instantly. The operation connected to that symbol had always occupied a strange place in his memory. Officially, it had never received much public recognition. Unofficially, it had changed the lives of everyone involved. Ryan opened the folder and began reading. The pages contained fragments rather than complete records. Dates, locations, names. Some sections had been removed years earlier. Others had been heavily restricted. Yet one detail appeared repeatedly throughout the surviving documents. The symbol. Every time Ryan saw it on the page, he found himself picturing Emily standing beside the memorial wall. Around 9 o'clock that evening, he placed a call to Mike Dawson. The retired operator answered on the second ring. "Tell me you found something," Mike said. Ryan leaned back in his chair. "Not exactly. That sounds encouraging. The more I look, the less sense this makes." Mike was silent for a moment. "You think the woman is connected somehow?" "I know she is connected. I just do not know how." Ryan explained everything Emily had told him about the old metal tag, the box of personal belongings, and the fact that her father had passed away when she was young. When he finished, Mike let out a slow breath. "That changes things. That is what I thought. Did she tell you her father's name?" Ryan closed his eyes. That was the problem. During their conversation, he had become so focused on the symbol that he had failed to ask the most important question. "No," he admitted. Mike groaned. "Ryan, you spent an hour talking to the only person we have seen connected to that operation in decades, and you forgot to ask her father's name?" Ryan rubbed his forehead. "I know. What are you going to do now?" Ryan looked down at the folder. "Find out everything I can before contacting her again." After ending the call, he continued searching through old records. Midnight came and went. Then, shortly after 1 in the morning, he discovered something unusual. Tucked between 2 pages was a photocopy of a personnel roster. Most of the names were familiar. Ryan recognized every member of the team. Yet one section immediately caught his attention. A line had been blacked out. Someone had intentionally removed a name from the document years earlier. Ryan stared at the redacted space. He had seen it before, but never given it much thought. At the time, he assumed it related to administrative procedures. Now he was not so sure. He compared the roster to other documents. The same missing entry appeared again and again. One name. Always removed. Always hidden. Ryan felt a growing sense of anticipation. Whatever mystery surrounded Emily seemed connected to that missing identity. The next morning he returned to the base archives. As a senior commander, he still had access to historical records unavailable to most people. For hours he reviewed files, photographs, and correspondence connected to the operation. Then he found something that stopped him cold. It was an old group photograph taken shortly before deployment. Ryan recognized every face except one. A man standing near the edge of the image had been partially obscured by a crease in the paper. On the back of the photograph, a handwritten note remained barely visible. Most of the ink had faded, but a few words could still be read. Ryan leaned closer. His heart began to pound. The note referenced a family. It referenced a daughter. And for the first time since meeting Emily Carter, Ryan realized that the answers he was searching for might not be buried inside military archives alone. They might have been hidden in plain sight for more than 20 years. Ryan spent the next 2 days following every lead he could find. The faded note on the back of the photograph refused to leave his thoughts. He had enlarged the image, compared it against other archived records, and consulted every surviving document connected to the operation. Most of the information led nowhere. Yet one fact became increasingly clear. Someone had deliberately removed a name from the historical record. The more Ryan investigated, the more unusual that omission seemed. Late Wednesday afternoon, he received a call from an archivist who occasionally assisted with military history projects. The woman explained that she had located a storage box containing materials scheduled for digitization years earlier, but never completed. Ryan drove to the archive facility immediately. The box itself appeared ordinary. Dust covered the corners, and the inventory label had partially peeled away. Inside were photographs, correspondence, briefing summaries, and personal notes. Ryan carefully examined each item. Nearly an hour passed before he discovered something important. Folded between 2 documents was a copy of an old commendation recommendation. Large portions had been redacted, but one sentence remained visible. It referenced extraordinary service performed by an individual whose identity had later been restricted. At the bottom sat an incomplete signature. Ryan stared at the page. The surname had been blacked out, but the first name remained partially visible. Daniel. He felt a sudden jolt of recognition. The name itself was common, yet something about it felt familiar. He searched through his memory, trying to place it. Then another detail surfaced. During their conversation at the memorial gathering, Emily had briefly mentioned that her mother rarely spoke about her father. Ryan had not thought much of it at the time. Now he wondered whether that silence had been intentional. That evening, he decided to contact Emily again. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice carried mild surprise. Commander Walker? Please call me Ryan, he said. I hope I am not interrupting anything. Not at all. Ryan hesitated before continuing. I was wondering if you might be willing to meet for coffee. There are a few questions I would like to ask about your father. A brief silence followed. Is something wrong? Emily asked. No, Ryan replied honestly. I just think there may be more to his story than either of us realized. The following morning they met at a small waterfront cafe overlooking the harbor. Emily arrived carrying a canvas bag. She seemed curious but not nervous. After exchanging greetings, she placed the bag on the table. I brought something, she said. Ryan watched as she removed a small wooden box. The box showed signs of age but had been carefully maintained. Emily rested her hand on the lid for a moment before opening it. Inside were photographs, letters, a few military keepsakes, and the metal tag that had inspired her tattoo. Ryan picked it up carefully. The symbol was identical to the one on her wrist. Seeing it again sent another wave of questions through his mind. Emily handed him several photographs. Most showed ordinary family moments. Birthdays, holidays, backyard gatherings. Then Ryan found a picture of a smiling man holding a young child. He froze. The image was older, but the face was unmistakable. Ryan knew him. Not well. Not personally. But he knew exactly where he had seen him before. The partially obscured figure in the group photograph. The missing man. The one whose name kept disappearing from official records. Ryan looked up slowly. Emily, he said. Is this your father? She nodded. Yes. His name was Daniel Carter. Ryan felt the pieces beginning to align for the first time. Daniel Carter. The missing name. The hidden records. The unexplained symbol. None of it was coincidence. Yet what shocked him most was Emily's expression. She was looking at him expectantly, completely unaware that she had just answered a question military records had failed to answer for more than 20 years. And as Ryan stared at the photograph in his hands, he realized the mystery was no longer about a forgotten symbol. It was about a man whose story had somehow vanished from history, leaving only fragments behind for his daughter to discover decades later. For several seconds, neither Ryan nor Emily spoke. The sounds of the cafe faded into the background as Ryan continued staring at the photograph. The smiling man holding a young child was no longer a mystery. He was Daniel Carter, the name that had been missing from records, removed from reports, and quietly forgotten by history. Emily watched Ryan carefully. "You know him, do not you?" she asked. Ryan set the photograph down gently. "I think I do." Emily leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Ryan took a slow breath. "It means I have spent days trying to understand why your father's name kept appearing around pieces of a story that never seemed complete." Emily looked confused. "I do not understand." "Neither do I." "Not completely." Ryan reached into his folder and removed a copy of the old group photograph from the archive. He placed it beside the family picture Emily had brought. Her eyes widened immediately. "That is him," she said. "That is my father." Ryan nodded. "That is what I believed." Emily stared at the image. Why would he be in a military photograph if nobody ever talked about his service? Ryan wished he had an answer. Instead, he asked a different question. "Did your mother ever leave behind anything else? Letters? Documents? Anything she might have considered important?" Emily hesitated. Then her expression changed. "Maybe." Ryan sat up straighter. "Maybe. There is one thing." Emily looked down at the wooden box. "After my mother passed away, I found an envelope hidden inside a drawer. I never opened it." Ryan blinked. "You never opened it?" Emily gave a small shrug. "It felt personal. The envelope had my father's name written on it. I assumed it belonged to him." Ryan felt his pulse quicken again. "Do you still have it?" "Yes." "Where?" "At home." Ryan exchanged a long look with her. Neither needed to say what they were both thinking. The envelope might contain nothing important, or it might contain answers they had been searching for since the day they met. Later that afternoon, they drove separately to Emily's house. It was a modest home in a quiet neighborhood overlooking a small stretch of coastline. Inside, framed family photographs lined the walls. Ryan noticed Daniel appearing in only a handful of them. In most cases, he stood slightly apart from the camera, smiling but reserved. Emily disappeared into another room and returned carrying a sealed envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. Ryan immediately noticed the handwriting on the front. "Daniel Carter." Emily sat beside him at the kitchen table. "I think it is time," she said softly. Ryan agreed. Emily carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter and a smaller piece of paper. She unfolded the letter first. The handwriting matched the name on the outside. Daniel had written it himself. Emily began reading aloud. The letter was addressed to his daughter. He explained that there might come a day when she would have questions that nobody around her could answer. He wrote about honor, service, sacrifice, and responsibility. Yet he never described specific missions or military details. Instead, he focused on values. Ryan listened quietly until Emily reached the final paragraph. Her voice slowed. Daniel wrote that if circumstances ever allowed the truth to be told, someone would eventually find her. Someone who remembered. Someone who knew what had happened. Emily lowered the letter. The room became silent. Ryan felt a chill move through him. Daniel had written those words decades earlier. Somehow he had anticipated that parts of his story would remain hidden. Then Emily unfolded the second piece of paper. It was a list of names. Ryan recognized several immediately. Former operators. Former teammates. Men he had served beside years ago. At the very bottom sat one final name. Ryan Walker. Emily stared at it. Then she slowly looked up. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. For the first time, Ryan realized this was never an accident. Daniel Carter had expected that one day the truth would surface. And somehow, across more than 20 years, he had left a trail leading directly back to the people who still remembered. Emily sat motionless at the kitchen table, her eyes fixed on the final name at the bottom of the list. Ryan Walker. The room felt strangely quiet despite the distant sound of waves outside the house. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The realization was settling in slowly. Daniel Carter had written that letter decades earlier, yet somehow he had known exactly who might one day help his daughter uncover the truth. Emily finally broke the silence. "My father knew you." Ryan looked down at the paper. "Yes." He paused. "At least, I believe he did." Emily folded her arms across the table. "You still are not telling me everything." Ryan nodded. She was right. For days he had been following clues without sharing the full weight of what he was beginning to understand. The problem was that he was still piecing it together himself. There are things about your father's service that were never widely discussed, Ryan said carefully. Not because he did anything wrong. Quite the opposite. Emily studied him. Then why was his name removed from records? Ryan leaned back in his chair. That is exactly the question I have been trying to answer. He pulled the group photograph from his folder and placed it beside the letter. This picture was taken more than 20 years ago. For years I looked at it without noticing anything unusual. Now I realize your father was standing in plain sight the entire time. Emily stared at the image. If he was important, why did nobody ever tell me? Ryan did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his phone and made a call. A familiar voice answered. Mike Dawson. Ryan explained what they had discovered. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Mike said something neither Ryan nor Emily expected. I remember Daniel. Ryan sat upright. You do? Not clearly at first. The name did not mean anything when you mentioned it before. But after hearing the letter and the list, it came back. Emily leaned forward anxiously. Ryan placed the call on speaker. Tell us what you remember. Mike took a deep breath. Daniel was never the kind of person who wanted recognition. Most people overlooked him because he preferred staying in the background. But everyone trusted him. Emily listened without blinking. For the first time in her life, someone was speaking about her father from first-hand memory. Mike continued. He had a reputation for helping people without expecting anything in return. If someone needed assistance, Daniel was usually the first person there. Ryan felt a growing certainty forming in his mind. The image he had built from records and fragments was finally becoming a real person. Not a forgotten name. Not a mystery. A man. A father. A teammate. After the call ended, Ryan opened the folder one more time. Hidden between two sheets of paper was another document he had overlooked earlier. It was a recommendation letter written by a commanding officer. Most of the text remained classified, but one sentence was visible. Ryan read it aloud. His contribution to the success of the operation cannot be overstated, and several members of the team owe their future to his actions. Emily looked up immediately. Several members? Ryan nodded slowly. The meaning struck him with unexpected force. Suddenly memories he had ignored for years began fitting together. Faces, conversations, details from old briefings. One fact emerged above all the others. Daniel Carter had not simply been connected to the operation. He had played a critical role in it. Ryan lowered the document and looked directly at Emily. His voice was quieter than before. I think I finally understand why your father left my name on that list. Emily waited. Ryan felt emotion tightening in his chest. Because there is something I should have remembered much sooner. He looked back at the photograph of Daniel holding his young daughter. Your father did not just serve alongside us. He changed the course of our lives. And for the first time since this mystery began, Ryan realized that the story he was uncovering was also deeply personal to him. The days that followed felt different. The mystery that had begun with a symbol was finally transforming into something more meaningful. Ryan Walker no longer spent his time searching for hidden records alone. Now he was searching for memories. If Daniel Carter's story had been lost, then the people who remembered him were the key to bringing it back. Within a week, Ryan had contacted nearly every surviving member of the old team whose name appeared on the list found inside Daniel's letter. Some lived across the country. Others had retired to quiet towns and rarely spoke about their military years. Yet when Ryan explained why he was calling, the responses were remarkably similar. Every one of them remembered Daniel. Emily could hardly believe it. For most of her life, conversations about her father had been brief and incomplete. Suddenly, she was hearing from people who spoke about him with admiration and respect. Ryan arranged a private gathering at a veterans community center near the coast. Nothing formal. No cameras. No publicity. Just a room filled with people connected by shared history. Emily arrived carrying the same wooden box. She seemed nervous as she stepped inside. Ryan greeted her near the entrance. Around the room, small groups of veterans were already talking. Several looked toward Emily with expressions that immediately caught her attention. They were smiling, not because they recognized her personally, but because they recognized something of Daniel in her. One by one, they introduced themselves. Mike Dawson spoke first. He described Daniel as dependable, thoughtful, and remarkably calm under pressure. Another former teammate remembered how Daniel always made time to encourage younger service members. A third veteran laughed, while recalling Daniel's ability to lighten tense situations with perfectly timed humor. Emily listened quietly. At times she smiled. At other moments, she simply stared at the floor, overwhelmed by how much she was learning. For the first time, her father was becoming a real person rather than a collection of unanswered questions. As the afternoon continued, Ryan noticed a pattern emerging. Although each veteran remembered different moments, they all described the same character. Daniel consistently put other people first. He rarely spoke about himself. He avoided attention whenever possible. Yet somehow he left a lasting impression on everyone around him. Later, one of the older veterans opened a small folder he had brought with him. Inside were photographs that had never appeared in official archives. Several included Daniel. Emily carefully examined each image. Then she stopped at one particular photograph. It showed Daniel standing beside Ryan many years earlier. Both men were smiling. Emily looked up. "You knew him better than you have been saying." The room grew quiet. Ryan looked at the photograph for a long moment before answering. "I think I did." Emily waited. Ryan took a deep breath. "The truth is that some memories only started returning after I saw your tattoo. At first I remembered the symbol. Then I remembered the operation. Then I remembered your father. Now I remember something else." Every person in the room turned toward him. Ryan's voice softened. Daniel was the kind of man people trusted completely. When things became difficult, everyone looked to him. Several veterans nodded immediately. None disagreed. Ryan continued. "For years I wondered why his name disappeared from records. Now I think I understand. The operation became the focus. The paperwork became the focus. The history became the focus. Meanwhile, the person at the center of it all slowly faded into the background." Emily looked down at the photograph in her hands. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. Not because she was sad, because she was finally hearing the truth. Before leaving, each veteran shared one final memory about Daniel. By the end of the evening, Emily carried home more stories than she had gathered in the previous 20 years combined. Yet Ryan knew there was still one piece missing. The most important piece. The full truth about why Daniel had placed Ryan's name at the bottom of that letter. And Ryan had finally decided that it was time to tell her. 3 weeks after the gathering at the Veterans Center, Emily received an invitation she never expected. Ryan Walker had arranged a special ceremony at the same waterfront memorial where their story had begun. Unlike the annual event she attended as an anonymous visitor, this gathering was smaller and more personal. Former teammates, military families, retired service members, and community leaders had come together for one purpose: to honor a man whose story had remained unfinished for far too long. The morning air carried the familiar scent of the ocean as Emily arrived. She paused near the entrance and looked around. Faces she now recognized greeted her warmly. Mike Dawson waved from across the walkway. Several veterans approached to shake her hand. What struck her most was how naturally they spoke about her father, not as a distant figure from history, but as someone they still remembered with genuine affection. Ryan met her near the memorial wall. He was dressed in formal uniform and carried a small presentation case. Emily immediately noticed the seriousness in his expression. "There is something I have wanted to tell you from the beginning," he said. They walked together toward a quiet area overlooking the harbor. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ryan finally continued. "When I first saw your tattoo, I thought the mystery was about a symbol." Emily nodded. "And now?" Ryan looked toward the water. "Now I know it was about a man." He explained that years earlier, after the operation connected to the symbol, attention had shifted toward reports, procedures, and official records. Over time, the people involved moved on with their lives. Careers continued. Families grew. Memories faded. Yet one fact remained unchanged. Daniel Carter had earned the respect of every person who knew him. Ryan took a deep breath before speaking again. "Your father left my name in that letter because he trusted me." Emily felt emotion rising in her chest. Ryan continued. "Not because I held a rank. Not because I had authority. Because he believed that if the truth ever needed to be found, I would help protect it." Emily looked down for a moment. He was right. Ryan smiled. "I hope so." A short time later, guests gathered near the memorial platform. The ceremony began with several veterans sharing brief remarks. None focused on military achievements. Instead, they spoke about character, integrity, humility, kindness. Every story painted the same picture. Daniel Carter had made people around him better. When Ryan finally stepped forward to address the audience, the crowd grew silent. He spoke about how history sometimes remembers events while forgetting individuals. He spoke about the importance of honoring not only service, but also the values that define a life. Then he turned toward Emily. There are people who seek recognition, he said, and there are people whose impact is so profound that recognition eventually finds them. Daniel Carter belonged to the second group. Emily felt tears forming as Ryan opened the presentation case. Inside rested a medal and a framed certificate recognizing Daniel's contributions and service. The documents had been reviewed, verified, and formally approved after months of effort. Ryan stepped forward and placed the case in Emily's hands. For a moment, she could not speak. The audience rose to its feet. Veterans who had served alongside Daniel stood shoulder to shoulder. Family members applauded. Friends applauded. Complete strangers applauded. Yet what moved Emily most was not the recognition itself. It was the feeling that her father had finally returned from the shadows where history had left him. Ryan then did something unexpected. He stood at attention and offered a formal salute toward the memorial. One by one, every veteran present followed. The harbor grew quiet. The flags moved gently in the breeze. Emily looked down at the symbol tattooed on her wrist. Weeks earlier, it had been nothing more than an unexplained connection to a father she barely understood. Now it represented something entirely different. It represented a story preserved across decades by people who refused to forget. As she looked around the gathering, she realized that Daniel Carter's greatest legacy was not a mission, a document, or a medal. It was the lives he touched. And thanks to a chance visit to a memorial and a symbol that caught one commander's attention, that legacy would never be hidden again.